Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a B-movie review. I'll be having a look at 1989 Cyborg, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. So Cyborg actually started life as Masters of the Universe Part 2, but it was quickly changed in pre-production when that production just fell through. So the film that we are looking at, obviously, is a post-apocalyptic sort of sci-fi martial arts movie, and it starts off sometime after the post-apocalypse. Now, we're told in flashback that Jean-Claude Van Damme's character Gibson was actually some kind of sort of bounty hunter, hired mercenary type, and originally he's hired to protect a woman and her two children to get out the city. Now, this kind of like, you know, in city now, we're told that there's this sort of plague on top of the apocalypse. There's a plague that's killing out pretty much the rest of humanity. So he gets this sort of small family out of the city and into the sort of countryside, where he actually ends up sort of falling in love and ends up sort of settling down with them. But it's cut short when a pirate called Fender basically comes and pretty much murders his sort of family and sort of kidnaps his adoptive daughter, essentially. And essentially, sort of in quite a good scene, he basically sort of gives the daughter the chance to sort of save her by, there's the Gibson, Jean-Claude Van Damme, the mother and her young son in this well, and this girl's trying to sort of keep him up by sort of holding this barbed wire, which is obviously not going to do, but it's obviously going to pretty much scar this girl for the rest of her life. Flash forward, and we sort of go into the sort of the future slightly more, and there's actually a cyborg, the title Cyborg, who's basically got a kind of cure, the information to make a cure stored in her sort of system, memory banks or whatever, and she basically needs some sort of, they call it a slinger, which is essentially like, say, a mercenary, to sort of try and help her get from the city where she is to Atlanta, which is where they can develop the cure. Now she's pursued by this sort of gang of land pirates, and they ultimately sort of temporarily defeat Van Damme and take her off. Now Van Damme, they don't know who he is actually, but he's basically sort of on the tail of Fender to basically get revenge for what happened earlier, although Fender doesn't really remember him at this point. And Gibson doesn't realise that his sort of adoptive daughter is now kind of grown up and part of this Fender's gang. Now on the way, Van Damme teams up with this another female survivor, and after a series of battles, they sort of try and track down and stop Fender and his gang from reaching Atlanta with the cyborg. He's more interested in just sort of killing Fender, whilst his sort of female companion is sort of more interested in trying to sort of cure the plague and stuff. So that's pretty much the plot. So this film is regarded as one of the sort of poorer Van Damme films, but to be honest with you, when I saw this when it was first released, this is actually probably the film that got me into Jean-Claude Van Damme. I wasn't necessarily massively into martial arts, and I know Bloodsport is regarded probably as one of his best films, but this was the film that sort of got me interested in Van Damme. So it's quite an interesting looking film. Now, a couple of things I will say that I did really like about this film. I think the music is very good. I mean, this is obviously a relatively cheap production, but I think the music is quite effective. And another thing, I think some of the camera work is pretty damn good. There's some really sort of like effective shots of like just the bad guys kind of running in slow mo, and it kind of they just look good. And there's a few other shots that I think are actually fairly artistic for this sort of lower end film, basically. So it's pretty decent. The film itself doesn't have a hell of a lot of dialogue. This being one of Van Damme's earlier films, he still has an extremely sort of thick accent and maybe not the best English, to be honest with you. The acting all around it is fairly poor. Some of the lines and the dialogue are pretty crap. The very last line in the whole film, where the cyborg says something along the lines of, "Perhaps he's the cure for the world," it's just really badly cheesy. And the bad guys, the sort of pirates, way overacting, are always kind of like shouting or growling, whatever they say. So I will say the main bad guy, Fender, played by Vincent Klin, is a pretty scary looking dude in this film. And there's you know, there's a pretty decent sort of fight scene between them in the end. The action, you know, is fairly stylized and, you know, pretty decent for a sort of low budget 90s flick. And as I say, because of, I think, the probably above average camera work, I personally think it makes it look, you know, a pretty decent film. Now, in regards to it being a post-apocalyptic sort of adventure, the problem this maybe is that we see there's loads of forestry and vegetation and stuff, so the land still looks pretty much really unscarred by what you would consider a post-apocalyptic landscape. So there's no real reason why people, you know, couldn't live in a sort of a better condition when there's still obviously plenty of vegetation and you know, and means to do things like that. So that was maybe, you know, most apocalyptic stuff you'll sort of see in deserts and stuff, but this is primarily in woodland areas and kind of ruined cities and stuff like that. So when you are in the cities, it looks a little bit better, but I think when you're in the forest, it just looks a bit, you know, it looks a bit weird for a post-apocalyptic film. So, you know, to be fair, it's probably fairly average. There are some, the acting is certainly a step down, but some of the sort of like the design of this film, I think, is probably above average. So overall, it's probably averaging around about a 5 out of 10. I think the costumes look pretty decent. You know, I quite like the look of this film. It just maybe the substance isn't all that fantastic. So 5 out of 10 for me for this one. Have you seen it? Let me know what you're thinking. Have you seen any of the Cyborg sequels? That really don't have anything to do with this film. One final note, I would say this. It being called Cyborg is a bit of a misdirection because the Cyborg really doesn't feature into the plot very much at all, to be honest with you. She's really superfluous to the actual main plot, to be honest with you. So it's a bit of a weird, it's a bit weird that they're calling it Cyborg because she's, as I say, she's not in it. She doesn't have a hell of a lot of screen time, and we're told that she's carrying the cure to the plague, but we never see the plague get cured or really much of the plague at all to begin with. So it's a bit of an odd choice of a title, but there you go. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. See you later.